finally did sit down and surprised us all when he started that, and we're very, very grateful for having that Demystifying Patanjali.
Well, let's continue on a little bit. First off, I wanted to invite those of you who might come early each week. We'll have the downstairs classroom available for meditation. It's a little noisy down there sometimes, not always, so if you have headphones, you might want to bring them. But those of you who would like to do, let's say, your evening meditation before class rather than after, you're welcome to do that. And those of you who would like to take Prem Shanti's most excellent 6 p.m. yoga class beforehand are welcome to do that as well. I recommend, because of the discussion component, bringing a little something to write on, a pen, and your book as well each week. Okay?
And I wanted to say happy birthday to Karen Sherman and Jan Hadlich. People who have birthdays on this day need a special boost.
And to acknowledge, of course, it's 9/11. So.
Yeah.
Now, over the past years, I've had the opportunity to do the Yoga Sutras class in a variety of different formats. And because all we had, as Padma just said, also, was the transcriptions of his talks. Now, how many of you have at least looked at those transcriptions? Some of us have access to them. Master was a marvelous speaker, and not unlike Swami, however, in his speeches, you never knew really what the subject was. So he starts off on Patanjali, and then he, like a fly fisherman, he starts roaming all over the gloaming. And by the time he gets to the end of the thing, it's like, and now we've discussed Patanjali, and that's it. So as charming as his transcriptions are, they don't come that close to Patanjali, although there's some really deep stuff in there. Where I'm going with this is, because we didn't really have material to do these courses, I had to rely on other commentaries. And there's a beaucoup number of commentaries, some quite famous, such as Ananda's, Vivekananda's commentaries, and even has come available some of the work from Lahiri, though he didn't actually write anything himself. I add my testimony to Kriyananda's, to Swamiji's in the book, that those commentaries, if the sutras themselves are abstruse, the commentaries are worse, for the most part. Now, having said that, it's not a critique, because there are some really quite interesting insights, and I forget the American disciples in the Ramakrishna line, I can't think of the name suddenly, but theirs is quite interesting from a psychological standpoint. Jamuna recently got me yet another one I hadn't seen. So there's nothing, it's not a question of like this is best and so forth. But what I lacked was that clarity and intensity that we have grown accustomed to, especially in Swami's work. But Masters, though more childlike and even more simple, I mean, thoughts are universally, not individually rooted. It's a pretty harmless sentence until you start thinking about it. And so Master, too, is deceptively simplistic to at least minds that deem themselves pridefully, usually intellectual. And the same thing with Swami, and it's also true of his music. His music, composers and musicians often look with some disdain on Swami's music because it's, frankly, too simple. And so, but that's what's needed. You know, my personal opinion, having studied it quite a bit over a number of years, is I personally believe it's probably, this scripture is probably for Treta Yuga. But nonetheless, the other thing I can say that isn't my opinion merely is the fact that unless you are Kriyavan, and what I mean by that is not just the obvious literal meaning, but unless you are a deep enough meditator where you're doing advanced pranayama with the spinal energies in one form or another, this book is pretty useless. Because what he's describing, what he's leading us toward, is the inner experience of yoga, not the outer do's and don'ts. He mentions the yamas and niyamas, he mentions some psychological kinds of obstacles and so forth, but it's child's play. When he starts talking about the different levels of samadhi and consciousness, you can read about it, and I read about it, Savitarka Samadhi, and it just goes on and on. And you can't make it. I once drew diagrams trying to figure out, because it was in this book and in that book. It's very difficult. Swamiji, guided through Master, and through his crystal clarity of perception, shows us the way in a very practical and yet uplifted way. Interestingly enough, because I've studied both books, Holy Science and this, because of what I do, and it's of course a privilege, although I feel like an idiot every time I try to pretend I know what I'm talking about, or what they're talking about, but nonetheless, what came to light is that the 4 books of Patanjali are the same 4 books of the Holy Science. The exact same structure that the Holy Science guides us through, though he didn't use these terms, is the Yoga Sutras. Now, Master says, among others, that Patanjali was an avatar. So I leave it to you to decide if it were possible, or if, just for fun and speculation, which of our masters he might have been. No further comment. There are less than 200 slokas in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and the 4 books are Samadhi Pada, Pada means book, Samadhi Pada, Sadhana Pada, Vibhuti Pada, and Kavalya Pada. Samadhi Pada it's a bit of a misnomer. I don't have all the notes that I would like to have, but it's sort of what it takes to achieve a transcendent state, and what are the obstacles. Sadhana Pada it's a little different. It's more like the Eightfold Path. What are the steps towards that? What are the practices, not the steps? What are the practices towards samadhi, transcendence? He uses samadhi, by the way, in a very different way than we're accustomed to. It's not that it's different in meaning, but it's a lot looser. Okay? Which is partly why I suspect he has all these technical subterms that Master simplified in the sense that he distilled the essence. Got an email from somebody just a day or 2 ago searching the internet, and there's lots of controversy as the Kriya path is being publicized in different ways, and it's quite confusing for people. And the email said, quoted a website saying, as we've all heard before, it's been said for decades, that Master diluted the teachings for the stupid Americans. And I wrote back, among other things, in my very centered, flaming way, that what's the difference between simplifying and taking the cream and the essence? Do you know the difference? I can assure you the writer of that email doesn't. But this is what we're up against in some ways, because I don't think we here have even begun fully to appreciate Master's teachings. Because the claim from India, and anybody from India, is that he diluted them. It's not true. I've come to deeper appreciation for what Swami has taught us, that Master took the essence and stripped away the Kali Yuga outer forms of the dogmatism around various pranayamas and, frankly, weird practices, or at least unnecessary practices in pranayama techniques, and distilled the cream and the essence of the Kriya path for us. And the more I walk this path, and the more I'm by force and necessity having to compare some of these notes, because I get so many questions about them, I just shake my head. Master was a true avatar, and we have much to appreciate. And the world will clamor and claim lots of other things, and we'll just shrug our shoulders and take a deep breath. But the crystal clarity that we're going to see in this book is a priceless gift. Now, since I lost my track, Padma, you were going to tell us something about, before I go on, who was Patanjali? Frankly, nobody knows. There are at least 3 or 4 Patanjalis that you can find if you research in different ages. The debate is just the same debate with the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita in terms of dating it. 200 BC, 400, 600 AD. It just goes on and on. Does it matter? Not to me. But nonetheless, Master says Patanjali was married. Yeah, poor guy. I mean, a useless fact, no doubt. But that's all we seem to know. There's just nothing on it. Don't bother to come. So we really don't know anything about him. But Master made the comment somewhere that it went like this. Yes, though he was an avatar, he also represented the yoga lineage, the Raja Yoga lineage. And if he lived, as he somewhere lived in the declining age, or in the Kali Yuga, or whatever he lived, he distilled the essence of the ancient wisdom in order to preserve it. And he buried it in a time capsule of such pithy aphorisms that are almost, I mean, you can read it, you can see the translated words, but, well, unless you're pretty deep yourself, they don't really have that much meaning. And so that time capsule is now beginning to be unraveled for us here in the inception of Dwapara. I truly believe that unless you're an advanced soul, or we get into Treta Yuga, however, I think the real wisdom behind it will come to light in the centuries ahead. Some people teach, or would like to believe, that the Yoga Sutras are the basis for the system of Hatha Yoga. They can believe all they want, but as the foreword suggests by Gyandev, they're not really related to asanas. I know Morley there, bless his heart, does his best to distill and extract some wisdom from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras for the Hatha yogis, but there just ain't much there. A few little things you can try to slip in there and apply, but not a whole lot. And hence, you know, that's the great confusion. That's why the word yoga is synonymous with asana. It's the same in India because of Kali Yuga, because the association with the physical form. And now, Gyandev's new book that's coming up about spiritual yoga, these and other commentaries on the sutras, there's this wave that's going through the asana movement, the Hatha Yoga world today, that's saying, wake up, people. This is much, much deeper. And we're riding the crest of that wave. Now, were you going to say anything about Master in the desert? Just a wee bit? Okay.
Just that Swamiji, of course, as many of you know, was called by Master out to his desert retreat when he was writing his Bhagavad Gita commentaries, or dictating them, I should say. And so he was present for absorbing those dictations, but woven through that in much conversation. Swami asked him many, many questions, he said, and a lot of Patanjali teaching was shared by Master with Swamiji in that process. And of course, in all of his, 3.5 years or whatever it was with him, and then subsequently the studying of his unpublished writings and all of his talks that were recorded and that kind of thing, Swamiji learned a great deal more about Patanjali, which is really sort of at the essence of the teachings that Master brought. And so that time especially, he said, when he was writing these commentaries, that time at the desert retreat with Master was invaluable in sort of hearkening back and calling back phrases and concepts that Master shared with him there, which he tried to convey vibrationally through this book.
Let's move on. Hatha Yoga Anushashanam. What's it mean? Exactly. So Padma, now we come to the practice of yoga.
Wow, you're moving way on. Okay.
Speedy guy. Say what now? Why now?
You're really bad.
That's news?
Okay. So, if you've read what the homework was. You know that Swamiji describes that Master said that now we come to the practice of yoga, that the word now in itself is worth much contemplation because it infers that there was something that precedes the practice of yoga. And what precedes the practice of yoga is the Sankhya philosophy, or the questions that we have that says, why are we here? The contemplation that we have, the why are we born? What's it all about? The pain and suffering that we experience when we find out that we are restricted in so many ways, the inconsistencies between the expansion we feel and the limitations of our little bodies and aches and pains, on and on and on. So Sankhya is that which precedes the practice of yoga, which is the next body of teaching, which is the how. How do we, what practices can we do to experience for ourselves the answers to these questions? And that's what Patanjali's Yoga Sutras describes. And then there is the final, the Vedanta. And the Vedanta state, body of philosophy is that which describes the experience of that union of yoga, that which is that experience of the results of the practices of yoga. And so that's where the first sutra begins.
Now, most of you, in these first two stanzas, these are things that all of you looking out have studied, many of you for decades and so forth. So none of what's in tonight is really particularly new to anyone. But I wanted to offer a thought on Sankhya. Sankhya isn't anything we study in terms of its roots in India and the many scriptures and teachers and so forth. I often have made it in my life an effort, and Zach and I were talking about this, and I mentioned last Wednesday night the need for you might say, a larger vocabulary. I'm not going to repeat that right now. Those who have ears to hear know what I'm talking about. But in the sense of Sankhya, you know, I'm going to offer you a thought. Science, rational science, is an aspect of Sankhya. Why? Because science attempts to peel back the koshas, the sheaths of matter, to discover what's underneath it. Even black magic, voodoo, and the dark arts, herbs, healing, all of that are aspects of Sankhya. What do I mean by that? Sankhya is that evolution of consciousness where the soul awakens, or the human being awakens, to the energetic properties of the world around us. Thus it is that acupuncture, various forms of energy healing, anything that uses the energetics, I mean all the way up to the mind power, but that's even a higher level. That's more of a treta quality. We're moving into Dwapara, energy. And Sankhya is, whether you see it philosophically, religiously, and spiritually, which is sort of the illusory nature of creation, it goes all the way down to the black arts, which is how to manipulate the forces of nature through a higher power, dark or white. Okay? And we are the culture of Sankhya. Now, the culture itself is largely misusing it and doing some good things too, of course. But Sankhya is right on the cusp, in effect, with yoga, the heart of which is energy. Yoga can be summarized through the word pranayama. Kriya is a pranayama. I mean, other than the asanas themselves, which are, Master said, optional, and which are the physical branch of health and healing, in a sense bridging. Asanas bridge the gap between the consciousness of Sankhya, because if you lift barbells and dumbbells, a great name, you're not there. you're just using physical things. But when you come to the practice of asana, even hatha, you have on some level, the insight to go within and move the energy. So Sankhya is not just some sort of, quote, philosophy. It's actually a level of evolution in consciousness somewhere between Shudra. What's after Shudra? Vaishya and Kshatriya. So it's tuning into the energy, certainly above Shudra. So what Master's talking about is something that we're very attuned to. Now spiritually, which is what we're talking about, of course, we're saying that the Sankhya insight, and on its dark side, it manifests as depression. The dark side is discouragement, disillusionment, skepticism. Okay? It's that point in life, sometimes quite young, but usually older in life, when, like Frank Sinatra, we say, is that all there is? Your senses are winking out one by one, and things ain't that fun anymore, and ain't not much left to do, and that's sort of the low end of Sankhya. Of course, we're not talking about that. We're talking about many of us, maybe all of us in this room, were born with that insight. Some of people it manifests as devotion, okay, but it was an insight. It is an insight to seek the kernel of consciousness and energy, especially energy, behind the appearance of seeming. But it is the necessary precondition for the practice of meditation, which we call yoga. It's the necessary draw. Swami said many times, because he was asked many times, if I'm drawn to Kriya Yoga, meaning the deeper aspects, more committed aspects of meditation, have I done this before in a past life? Oh, yes. You almost would have to be to want to do the advanced pranayama work. And not just the technical stuff, but the devotional part, the draw, the attraction to be still has to come from a level of realization. That's why he could say to Norman, who is discouraged, you must have very, very, very good karma to even want to know God. I mean, imagine. Maybe those aren't the words you use, but probably most of you do want to know God in those words. How few out of 1,001 even wants. And so Sankhya is no sort of toy or plaything. It's no, gnarly thing from India that we could care less about. It's a deep principle of consciousness. And it's important, I think, or helpful for us in our vocabulary to understand, even if we don't use that fancy word in speaking with others or introspecting with ourselves, that that's what it's about. You all know the cosmic gases, which is why I felt the luxury to talk about what I just did and not so much talk about the principles of duality and how God created the universe and that sort of thing, which leads to the insight of Sankhya, that insight that life can't fulfill us. Even when we have many desires, we're torn, of course, but nonetheless, we wouldn't be in a room like this unless, despite of all of our desires and hang-ups and problems, there's something that calls us to go within. We have that basic level, and we've committed ourselves to the next step, which is, what do I do about it? Okay? And what I do about it is be still and know. And more deeply than that, more scientifically than that, for we're privileged to have, is the tools and the attraction to the use of energy to awaken that insight. If you read Master's teaching sensitively, beginning with chapter 26 of Kriya Yoga, and including that thing where he gives, I always laugh when I read it because it seems so something or other. He says, give me 12 boys of the worst type and I'll teach them Kriya Yoga, and if they practice it in the way that I teach them, they'll become saints. And I'm thinking, okay, show me. I'm from Missouri. Of course, the big condition, Swami always says, yeah, if they practice it the way I teach them. And I think to myself, sure, if Master taught 12 of those boys, what kind of karma would that be, right? I mean, it's a simultaneous equation that can't be proved. Is sort of why I laugh about it, But he'd say stuff like that. He could get away with that. I couldn't say that and get away with it, you see. But still, there's an underlying message And the underlying message for us in Dwapara Yuga that Lahiri really hammered home. I saw in one of Larry's little tear-off things the other day the quotation that he says the potency of Kriya will not be lost when I am gone. Something like that, right? And he says, I don't forget the rest of it, but practice, 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 banat, banat, banjai. And the emphasis for us is do it. Do it now. Yes, devotion. Yes, accuracy and correctness in our Kriya. But you know, we've got so many problems, let's face it, that just do it. Practice Kriya. I remember one time Swami got before a group of us in the latter years of his life, and he looked around and, I'll use my words, he said basically, this is at the expanding line, he said, looking around, he says, what has meditation done for you all? You know, he had that childlike transparency to be so, not brutally self-honest, but just so honest that, you know, it brings tears to my eyes sometimes. And all we have to do is show up, do our Kriya. Don't worry about the rest of the crud, you know. And the older you get, you realize how much crud there really is. And when you're young, you're just full of yourself, and you think you're going to get samadhi in 6 months, and that's good too. Go for it. Okay, that's wonderful. So each stage of life has its, you know, pluses and minuses. But this is what we're talking, you know, the Yoga Sutras, and this is the last point I want to make on Shankya. And the word now allowed, what's his name? Patanjali. I don't know anything about him. I don't have a personal relationship with this fellow. Allowed Patanjali to ignore things like the Bhagavad Gita, Sermon on the Mount. He didn't have to go there. He didn't have to preach to anybody. He was talking to yogis. He didn't need to do all the platitudes and I mean, you know, he indicates the obstacles and stuff, psychologically and otherwise, but he freed himself from the burden of most great scriptures. And he put on a white lab coat and he put out a clipboard. I've never read anything so clinical in my life. There's almost no devotion in it, at least apparently not. But there is a depth of perception there that, at least for us jnana yogis, and I hope for everyone to some degree, is so powerful. I love the Bhagavad Gita. I'd say I love it more. But I want to also say that the path of Kriya Yoga has its roots in the Yoga Sutras. He uses the term Kriya Yoga twice. Bhagavad Gita doesn't use it at all. There's some references to it, as we know. But they're very passing references. This is the Bible of our. If somebody asks you, what do? We practice Ashtanga Yoga. We practice the eightfold, eight-limbed path. That's what Raja Yoga is, folks. This is our scripture. Okay? It doesn't have the Shankya part, and it doesn't have much of the Vedanta part. I mean, it does have some of that, but this is it. And this is for the scientific yogi. This is the clinical description of what we're doing. Now, the first two books are the most important, and we're going to focus mostly on those. Samadhi Pada and Sadhana Pada. Vibhuti, what is Vibhuti? It's the sacred ash, right? After a ceremony, when you come up for Kriya, you get the ash blessing. Or at the temples in India, like we've been to, many of us, and Gita and I up in the mountains, you know, they're always throwing this sacred ash at you and stuff like this. And, what is sacred ash? Sacred ash is, according to the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures, is the remnants of the yajna, the remnants of the discipline, the remnants of the fire rite of Kriya, of self-offering. Okay? And so it is the fruit. And Vibhuti Pada is the chapter in which he gives the samyama, the three highest stages, which have no outward parallel as the first stages of the Eightfold Path do, or not much. And also the siddhis, you know, levitation, bilocation, telepathy, all the siddhis are enumerated even out of one side of his mouth, even as out of the other side of the mouth he says, He warns people from getting involved with the cities. And we laugh at these things, of course, because we don't have any of them. Maybe, maybe not. But I can tell you from my experience, and it's not about it's about the experience we children have had with Swami Kriyananda, that the manifestation of the cities are very real. And the temptation of the cities is very real. And this too, as Master said to Swami, when he talked about how he looked like Jesus Christ in the tableau in Hollywood, this will come, and this will come. And so this clinical analysis of the Eightfold Path of our resurrection is told in these pages. The Kavalyupada is really very much Vedanta, but it's also not Vedanta. It's just like the holy science, it's kind of like a look back. Once the soul has achieved liberation, what's it like? Now, just like the holy science and like the entire text of Vedanta itself, it's a cheap shot because oneness can't be described. He says in there the self is, well, I'll say the soul, the Purusha is self-luminous. The mind is imperceptible because the self cannot be perceived. It can only be, it only is. It simply is, knower, knowing, known as one. And so it has to be by the necessity of the articulation itself. All scriptures are an intellectual or poetic, artistic articulation of a state of being that makes it therefore a symbol. It makes it secondary. It may be the Word of God in some sacred vibratory sense, but it isn't the experience. We must always understand that. We can only feel it. We can only intuit it. We can only achieve it. So that look back is necessarily a kind of a half cup full kind of experience. Lastly, Ishwal Siddha, I mentioned it recently, I think Sunday, God cannot be proven, is very much the great insight of Shankya. And it's caused a lot of mischief, just like Buddha's teachings. His refusal to speak of God and higher things has caused a great deal of mischief. So too, there are some who feel God can't be proved. Is an atheistical statement, which of course it isn't. So we should move on, Padma.
Yeah, we're actually...
Yeah, it's okay because tonight everybody knows this stuff.
Yeah.
What's the next one? You'll see what I mean. You all know Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirod. We've been through it a million times, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's only the most important sutra.
It's the most stanza, but we're not going to leave it. We're going to constantly
We know the
refer
words,
to it.
but
Yeah.
we're still living it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I say we
I think we should break
move
up.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because this is going to take long.